Welcome to the next video. If you are running on a Mac or on a Linux operating system right now, like Ubuntu, then you can go ahead and skip this video. This video is going to be for Windows users, and it's going to be about setting up the Windows Subsystem for Linux 2 so that Windows users can have a Linux terminal. I need to say that it is possible, if you are running Windows, that your operating system is not compatible with the Windows subsystem for Linux. And if that's the case, you're going to need to find some sort of alternative Linux terminal. You may even struggle to complete the course and want to stop. If you end up being unable to set up the Windows subsystem for Linux, then your alternatives are going to be dual booting a Linux-based operating system like Ubuntu, switching to a Mac, using a cloud development environment like maybe GitHub Codespaces or Amazon Cloud9 or Amazon Code Catalyst. But you likely won't be able to proceed on your Windows operating system. There are emulated Linux terminals for Windows, which is different from the Windows subsystem for Linux in that it's not a true Linux operating system. But it would be a struggle to follow along with the rest of the course if you had to resort to that option. If those statements didn't make sense, sorry, let me give you some more context. Basically, most modern software is developed and especially deployed on Linux-based operating systems. Sadly, for a lot of Python tools, Windows users are kind of overlooked. A lot of common tools have poor documentation or are simply not supported on Windows. A Linux terminal is a staple of software development and is required for many of the tools that we're going to be using. So I would say if you're serious about developing Python code for production, any steps that you take to gain access to a Linux terminal is going to be a worthy investment for you. Let me explain what the Windows subsystem for Linux even is. For Windows users, there's a thing called the Windows Subsystem for Linux. I may get the technical details wrong here in my explanation, but if I do, it's not that important. My understanding is that the Windows Subsystem for Linux is a virtualized Linux environment. So it's like you're running two operating systems at the same time. One is Windows and then one is Linux. Those two operating systems share a file system. So when you're working on Linux, you can modify text files and images and whatnot that reside on a partition on your hard drive that the Windows machine uses. So it's almost as though you have two operating systems on one machine that have sort of a shared drive. Because the Windows subsystem for Linux relies on virtualization, you actually cannot install it on Windows 10 Home or below. You have to have at minimum Windows 10 Pro or Windows 11 Pro, which if you have Windows 10 Home or Windows 11 Home at the moment, I think it's like $100 to buy a license to upgrade to the Pro version. If you don't have the Pro version, virtualization is not supported, which means you're not going to be able to install or run the Windows subsystem for Linux or Docker, which we're not going to use in this course. But not having Docker is also kind of a showstopper for a lot of software development.
All right, well, on that cheerful note, let's go ahead and try to install the Windows subsystem for Linux. The first thing we're going to need to do is check to make sure our Windows operating system is compatible with the Windows subsystem for Linux. To do that, go down here to the search bar and search for About Your PC. And it should be the first thing to come up. Okay, in this menu, if we scroll down here to Windows specifications, we can see that for me, I have Windows 10 Pro, but you may not have that. If you have Windows 10 Home, it's time for you to look at other options. But if you do have Windows 10 Pro or Windows 10 Enterprise or Pro or Enterprise on Windows 11, you are good to go. Now that I've verified that my operating system is in fact Windows 10 Pro Edition, I know that I'm ready to install the Windows subsystem for Linux on my machine. To get started, I'll open up a browser and Google install WSL2. One of the first search results should be an article by Microsoft.com with the official docs to install the WSL on Windows. I found this documentation to be really helpful, so if you end up having issues with your installation, definitely refer to these. As we scroll down, we can see that they want us to use Windows PowerShell and use a command to install the Windows subsystem for Linux. Perfect, let's do it. Let's open up PowerShell by coming down to the search bar and searching for PowerShell. It should be one of the first things to come up, and then here in the menu we see we have an option to run as administrator. You'll need to click that one, otherwise the session won't have permission to install things on our machine. Note that after clicking run as administrator, you may see a shield icon down here. Click that and then click accept. Okay, so we have a PowerShell window open here. The docs said that the command was WSL-install. Before running that, I just want to confirm that WSL as a command is present on my machine, so I'll just type WSL, enter. The fact that we're seeing a lot of text output here instead of a big error message indicates that we do in fact have WSL as a command on our machine, which is a good first step. I didn't have to do anything special on my machine to have this command installed. It seems like the WSL command ships with recent builds of the Windows operating system. I'll type clear to clear my terminal. Now, before I actually run WSL-install in my terminal, I want to point out a sentence that I found in the docs. It says, this command will enable the features necessary to run the WSL and install the Ubuntu distribution of Linux, which actually is what I want, but you may want to install a different distribution of Linux for yourself or a particular version of Linux. And so if you want to do that, the docs tell us that you can run WSL-list-online to see a list of available distros. So let's do that. WSL-list-online. Nice, it worked. So we can see a list here of available Linux distros and some different versions. So it looks like the default distribution is just Ubuntu. I'm not sure what version of Ubuntu that is, so I kind of want to handpick Ubuntu-20.04 for myself. If you want to use a different distribution of Linux for yourself, or maybe just a more recent version of Ubuntu, feel free to pick any of the versions that you see here. If you want to be following along exactly, you could use the same version that I'm about to install. However, I'm sure that it won't make a huge difference in your experience. Now I'll go ahead and install the Ubuntu 20.04 version for myself by typing in WSL-install-D and then the code for the distribution name, which for me is Ubuntu-20-04, and run it. And we can see it's installing. Great. I do want to allow this app to make changes to my device. And now we'll just wait a little while for it to install. Great, it looks like the install worked for me successfully, and now it's telling me to restart my computer in order for the changes to take effect. And with that, I will power down my machine. Okay, I just restarted my computer and logged in, and the first thing that popped up when I did was this Ubuntu 20.04 on Windows window, which means that it's working. I'll go ahead and skip forward until something interesting happens. All right, it's asking me for my username now, so I will type Eric. I would recommend that for your username, you don't use any special characters or spaces. Hopefully this prompt will stop you from doing that if you try, but I wouldn't take any chances. This username is going to become a folder name where all of the files belonging to your user in this Linux environment will be stored. Looks like I need to set a password. Okay, so halfway through typing this, I decided, wait a sec, maybe I don't want a password on this because, it'd be kind of nice if every time I opened up the Windows Subsystem for Linux, I didn't have to type in a password every time because I already type in a password when I want to connect to my computer. After that, I came to my senses. So make sure you do set yourself a password, otherwise you won't have access to the sudo command, as well as some other things. I'll go ahead and follow the documentation to reset my own password, but for now, check it out. We have a working Linux terminal. Very, very exciting. Note that if we close this window, we can reopen the Windows Subsystem for Linux by going back down to the search bar and searching for Ubuntu 20.04 on Windows or whichever distro you installed. Click the app and it'll open right up. If getting to this point was a challenge because of your operating system or some other error that you were facing during the installation, great job! In subsequent videos, we're going to configure this terminal and make it a great developer experience, so see you in the next few.